night, Hezbollah has fired a rocket that has killed about a dozen children and injured many more. Before they knew what has happened, they have claimed all the attacks, and after realizing what they have done, they've tried to escape from that fact, as well as many Arab newspapers are sort of omitting the fact where the attack has came from. Um, and also in the most recent reports I've seen, they are even claiming this is an Israeli, uh, basically not a rocket, but a misfired Iron Dome projectile that basically hit this place. I'm Daniel, and joining me today is James. Hey, James, how are you doing?
This is horrifying. So I'm in sort of shock and horror. Children were intentionally targeted by Hezbollah with Iranian applied. That is the facts on the ground as we see them. Not only that, as you point out, Hezbollah initially seems to have taken credit for it, and now they're denying credit for it. But the fact is that children, that is to say, a playground, a football field where children are practicing, and a dozen children will be dead from this, and out many, many more innocent people, innocent children and families were there at what we in America call a soccer field. And it is common in America, common throughout the West, for parents to take their kids to soccer practice or football practice and watch it. And that's what we're looking at here is a group of children, mind you, obviously intended as missiles that are far more accurate than Hamas, missiles that can penetrate the Iron
Sorry,
Dome.
James, you are cutting off a little bit. Maybe turn off your video for now, and yeah, just so we have the clear audio at
Sure,
least.
sure. I'm sorry. Yeah, Hezbollah has far more sophisticated missiles that are more accurate, missiles that can evade Iron Dome. And that's why the logic of this is pretty plain. It came from the north. It came with an Iranian missile, and the kind of missile that knows that you can locate where it's going with greater precision than, say, those buckshot rockets that come out of Gaza. These are precision instruments. These kind of Iranian supplied, and Iran is behind it, ladies and gentlemen. I'll return to that. But these are Iranian supplied, sophisticated missiles. This was intentionally targeting civilians, intentionally targeting a playground where children and families were at. There's no other way of looking at it. This is a case of an actual war crime and atrocity. This is exactly what Israel is trying so hard to avoid. They say Israel is the one trying to do genocide. Israel is intentionally targeting civilians. No, this is an intentional targeting of civilians with precision weapons supplied by Iran, ladies and gentlemen. And we're going to have at least a dozen children who are just out there playing football dead, maybe a lot more, because there are a lot of severe injuries from this as well, and less severe injuries, but it was clearly targeted at civilians. More than that, targeted at children. Absolutely horrifying. It reveals the evil of Hezbollah, really. They want to destroy Israel, want to kill just as many Israelis as possible. And no matter what kind of Israeli children, they just want to destroy as many Israelis as they possibly can.
Yeah, so maybe a little bit more about the attack. So as I mentioned, I think it is confirmed there's been 12 dead children, they are on the thumbnail, and at least 42 injured from what I've seen so far. Um,
Horrible.
something else also, yeah, so I mentioned the fact that Hezbollah took credit originally, but once they found out what has happened, they tried to basically get away from that. They claim it's Israel's Iron Dome projectile. Also, but from what I understand, both the IDF and even the US intelligence pretty much are sure that it's Hezbollah, that this was from Hezbollah. I think specifically with US intelligence, it wasn't really sure if it was just a misfire or actually uh, or actually basically targeted. Um,
Frankly, it wouldn't much matter whether it was intentionally targeting children or was Iron Dome. There had to have been some kind of activation of Iron Dome, right? What was it, an act? There have been no. We know there've been all kinds of missiles coming from there. And if it had been Iron Dome, it was a reaction to a missile. But no, from what it looks like to me, is that this was accurately targeted. This is the kind of missile that can do that. This is the kind of missile when you get from Iran. It's not like I say, those buckshot rockets that they fire over in Gaza. It's really hard to say that this wasn't precision and aimed at civilians. There was no nearby military target. And given the nature of this missile, I can only think that Hezbollah was intentionally targeting civilians, specifically children there, which is really repulsive. These people are of killing children. These people is to kill so-called innocent civilians. Are innocent civilians, ladies and gentlemen, and they are being specifically targeted. And I think that the balance of the evidence suggests to me that they were.
so
of course, this will mean more displacement of civilians in the north of Israel, from the Golan Heights in northern Israel, especially the interior. Already more than 150,000 Israelis have had to flee their homes. We always talk about the displacement in Gaza. After Hamas from Gaza launched another attack aimed at civilians on October 7th, we have aimed at civilians. And now in solidarity for that, Hezbollah from the north is now, so these people aim at civilians, and is only Israel that ever gets the blame for civilian deaths, when Israel's policy is precisely the opposite, to avoid necessary deaths. They're being more gingerly than they should be, and more gingerly about civilian deaths than any war ever conducted in human history, as far as I can tell. And yet the other side absolutely targets civilians. There's no question about it on October 7th. Seems like here as well. And that's, and it really does hurt in the PR battle. And these monsters, the one thing they're aware are is PR savvy. They may be religiously living in the dark ages, but they are PR savvy when it comes to the weaknesses, the moral weaknesses of the West. And so when it looks like, yeah, okay, it's just slaughtered, and the West is that way, now they're back the credit for doing it. It is all a PR war, and the useful idiots, as Netanyahu properly called them in his speech to Congress the other day, going to ignore the genocidal intentions of Hamas and Hezbollah, even as they continuously focus on an accusation, a bizarre accusation of genocide on the part of Israel. This is horrific. I hope that Israel has a systematic, a couple of things it tells me. One, there should have been preemptive strikes. Once violence was threatened, and surely once the missiles and rockets started coming from Lebanon, there should have, at that point, they should absolutely have wiped out the capacity in southern Lebanon to do any such thing. The fact that they were able to do this, at all, shows a failure on the part of Israel to take aggressive enough action. The problem with Israel's response is not that they're being genocidal, it's that they're being too weak, too passive, too waiting for someone to die. You'll notice when the Houthis had launched drone after drone, missile after missile, but it was when a man finally got killed in Tel Aviv the other day that finally caused Israel to do a real response to the Houthis down in Yemen. Why do we have to wait for children to die? Why do we have to wait for civilians to die? That is an irresponsible approach on the part of the government. If we know they have this capacity, if we know they're threatening to use this capacity, and my God, after they've started to use this capacity, at each of those steps, you have to say, we have to now take aggressive action. But quite on the contrary, Israel waits until children are dead before a big response. Now, I hope there's a big response. I hope there's a huge response. I don't know what Israel can do. It's fighting a multi-front war. It's fighting a war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and it has to endure attacks straight from Iran, where they'll send hundreds of rockets and missiles that the Iron Dome catches on. They're playing defense, playing a passive defense, and not anticipating these horrors as they should, because Israel is playing a PR game and trying to appease the West.
Yeah, so we can talk about the international response a bit later, because there is something you mentioned about this attack and the fact that Israel didn't have to wait for this attack. You know, when Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, that was not a surprise. It was a surprise in a sense we didn't know it would be that day, but the fact that Hamas attacked was not a surprise. We knew it was going to happen, and Israel has been doing nothing about it. And similar with Hezbollah, it's not a surprise. Well, it's definitely not a surprise that this happened. I mean, Israel has been in a sort of a conflict. You can barely call it a war the way Israel has been conducting it. Uh, but Israel has been in this relationship with Hezbollah for at least few months, but actually like decades. We knew something would come from Hezbollah, and Israel has been doing nothing about it. So
Iran has not been giving Hezbollah all of those sophisticated missiles for no purpose, have they? Those things are expensive, and they are. And look at it. You know, you have someone like Vice President Harris, who's now the presumptive Democratic nominee in my country's presidential election. Ceasefire now. This war's got to stop. Okay, let's imagine you get your ceasefire, Vice President Harris, with Hamas. How will that affect the Houthis? No, not a lick. How will that affect Hamas? Not a lick. How will that affect Iran? Not one bit. Until America gets on board with Israel, poor Israel is going to be facing multi-front attacks from various Iranian proxies until America and Israel decide to put an end to the source of this problem, Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it will happen, whatever the results of the Hamas conflict are, it will energize from a different location, a different group, until we strike at the heart of this evil, what financially makes it possible and what gives it moral and religious justification.
yeah, and so you've mentioned the calls for ceasefire, and the attack. It hasn't even been 24 hours yet. We can count on the Western politicians to already come in and call for ceasefire. I think specifically it was Joseph Borrell, the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. If there is one thing among many that I hate about the European Union is every position has to have a long title. So I think this is like a EU, basically like a foreign affairs person, or foreign affairs. And he has been basically calling for ceasefire, that Hezbollah should cease all attack. But again, this whole conflict has been started by Hezbollah. How is it again on Israel to now, basically what do nothing about it? Do nothing about that the fact that many Israeli citizens, not in just this attack, but even before that, have been killed and will be killed in the future if Israel doesn't do anything about Hezbollah. And similarly, David Lammy, who we have talked about a bit in the past, who is the UK's foreign secretary, has also been calling for ceasefire. And many people have even called for investigation, and basically the reasoning was nothing should be done before the investigation. And I think that idea is simply ridiculous. We know Hezbollah is behind this. And even ignoring that, something should be done about Hezbollah either way. If, as you mentioned, a misfired rocket by the IDF. Again, this is pretty much like a arbitrary statement. Thank you. It's purely purely arbitrary, very baseless. But let's say if that is what have happened, it's still Hezbollah that has triggered it. It's still Hezbollah that has been attacking Israel for months now. Israel should have done something about Hezbollah on such a long time ago. There have been so many times where something could have been done. Similarly to Hamas, there's been so many times something could have been done about Hamas. We don't have to wait for hundreds, in cases of October 7, or in this case, dozens of Israeli children to die so Israel can do something about these terrorist organizations then that pretend they are a government just because, they control a certain territory.
Unbelievable. Hamas, the minute they take control over the Gaza Strip, more than 16 years ago, 17 years ago, they take control over the Gaza Strip, and within a few weeks, within a month of their coming to power, they're already lobbing rockets into Israel. Now, if Israel can stop those rockets with their Iron Dome, or if they can minimize damages if they get through, prevent deaths, end the deadly. No, you don't wait for people to die. They're already lobbing rockets at you. 17, 16, 15 years ago, Israel should have been doing something about Hamas. They really should have. Now, wait a minute. Look at the war in Lebanon. Okay, the UN comes in and says, okay, any Hezbollah activity south of this river is bad, dot, 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 dot. Okay, they engage military activity south of the river again and again. Israel do? Nothing. Where they wait until the missiles come over before they say, okay, now it's time for us to do something. And in this case, with the Houthis, they did until someone died. They endured drone strike or missile strike, but only when a man died in Tel Aviv did it suddenly require military action. Now that is waiting. We have an idiomatic saying in America, that's closing the barn door after the cows have gotten out. And yeah, Israel has perfected the art of closing the barn door after the cows have escaped, if you will, and people are dead. That it shows in itself a weakness of moral clarity and response. Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, all should have been attacked sooner and much more aggressive. And we shouldn't wait for atrocities like October 7th attack and destroy Hamas. We shouldn't wait for a dozen children at least to be killed before we attack Hezbollah. We shouldn't wait until a civilian in Tel Aviv is killed by a drone to attack the Houthis. And more than that, we should put the pieces together and realize that it is the Islamic Republic of Iran who funds, supports, and encourages just this, as well as launching their own attacks with hundreds of missiles and rockets against Israel directly. As you notice, we don't, the West, America and Israel doesn't say, okay, obviously Iran engaged in an act of war with that attack of hundreds of missiles and rockets straight from Iran on Israel. But look, no, only one Bedouin child got killed. And that was probably from an Iron Dome incident. So therefore, Iran, it would be an unfair escalation to go directly after Iranian military or leadership targets. Unbelievable irresponsibility, unbelievable fecklessness. We are encouraging with engraved invitation Iran to continue to attack Israel and to attack America and through its proxies, because we evade the role of Iran, even directly attack Israel with hundreds of rockets. Well, gee, Israel's got this Iron Dome. So therefore, geez, if only one Bedouin child is a casualty from the Iranian attack, boy, it would only be escalation on or America's part to be more aggressive against Israel. That is the perverse situation we live in. We have to wait for innocent civilians to die in order to do anything. And the minute Israel does something, they're the bad guy anyway. Guaranteed. Israel, you've just got to suck it up. And Israel says, no. Well, at least when people die, can we fight back some? No, you're the bad guys. You guys have to suck it up every time. But these calls for ceasefire are demands for Israel to just lay down, turn the other cheek, and take whatever civilian casualties their various enemies want to inflict upon them. And that is morally obscene.
Just for those coming late and wondering who is this heavenly voice talking when I'm silent, James is also on this episode. Just his camera is off because his internet is not the greatest right now. But and since I mentioned that, so we have a few comments in the chat, mainly talking about the idea of numbers. Someone mentioning the Hannibal Directive on October 7th. A point I would really like to get across, and you sort of touched on it, James, with the fact that, in only one person died when Iran attacked because Israel was able to defend themselves. One is too many. The purpose of government is to protect the rights of their citizens. That is the purpose. That is not something, when people say a country has a right to wage war or has a right to defend itself. No, that's not right. A country has an obligation towards its citizens to defend them. One citizen is too many. If on October 7 only one person died, that would be one too many, and Israel would have to do something about it. The fact that the only reason why, in a sense, Israel is either allowed or willing to do something about Hamas, and I think it's still not enough. The fact that the only reason it seems to be is the fact that a lot of people died is terrible. That's horrible. Every time, this is gonna,
Well,
imagine, yeah.
yeah, no, a good defensive response is a vastly disproportionate one. Proper use of, when someone uses force against you, they have set the terms. They have set the terms by initiating force. I tell the story all the time. When I was a little boy, I don't know, about 5 years old, I did what little boys often do. I punched my older brother, and I was 5 years old. And he was a very wise older brother. And he said to me, I'm going to let you get away with this one. But if you should ever hit me again, I will hit you back. Only I'm older and bigger, and I will hit you back 10 times harder. Now, that left a little impression on my mind. This 10 times harder thing is the way you have to do self-defense. The only way to discourage more force, once aggressive force has been threatened, is to overwhelm with a disproportionate response. Let me put it this way. Once the attack has happened, the defense, the only responsible defense, is to wipe out and eliminate the potential for it to happen again. You have to completely and utterly, one, physically incapacitate the attacker, and two, psychologically them with such a huge that they realize what's going to happen will be much worse on them than anything they launch against the innocent defender. And that's the thing. Valid self-defense properly is vastly disproportionate. 10 to 100 times harder. It sounds perfectly reasonable to me when you've been attacked, because they're not negotiating. They started an attack. We can't control their territory. They don't even wear uniforms with Hamas. You can't even separate out the civilians, and they do that on purpose. They want, for PR purposes, their own civilians, quote, civilians, to die. And so under these circumstances, you have to consider how far it goes. They put their military under hospitals, schools, mosques, etc. No. The way to respond is to attack the hospital, attack the school, attack the mosque, because it's their fault for putting military stuff under it and for attacking Israel. And it is 100% the disproportionate response and the much numbers that the defense will cause in a morally correct position and are necessitated by the initiation of force by the enemy. They are the fault of the aggressor. Full stop.
Let me quickly thank the super chatters. Thank you, Bonnie, for a super chat. Thank you, Jonathan, for your super chat. Thank you, Jonathan, again for a super chat. And thank you, Politicas. He says, Ayn Rand, he's quoting Ayn Rand. You can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring the reality. Iran is the reality we must confront. Great stream, chance. And I think this is a pretty good quote for wrapping up the episode. Yeah, you have to remember, behind all of while Israel has to do something directly and now about threats such as Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas, and effectively, I think, even the Palestinian Authority, something to remember is that Iran is behind all of this. Iran is behind most of the terrorism that comes against Israel. And if Israel cannot do it alone, United States have to realize that, yeah, they have been also at war with Iran for many decades.
For more than 40 years, for most of my life. When I was in 1979, I was 14 years old, something like that. For nearly all of my life, Iran has been engaged in active war after active war against the United States and the West the comment was correct. We cannot evade the consequences of Iran's threat. We cannot. We will continue to suffer October 7th. We will continue to suffer terrorism. And Iran is by far the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, whether it's against Israel or anyone else.
So just quickly before we wrap up, I have a message from Razi that is not the Ayn Rand quote. James, is it just written a bit differently?
I think I was being generous here. It's a paraphrase, in effect, of things that Ayn Rand has said. Ayn Rand did say that A is A and causality is a law, and she does make statements about evasion that are similar to this, but the exact quote is not correct. And I just would ask people to actually look up the quote if they're going to quote and cite Ayn Rand and get the wording correctly, and maybe even give us the source.
So yeah, for that I recommend the Ayn Rand lexicon. It's still a good quote, even though it's a bit of a paraphrase, but it's good to mention just so people are not confused.
Yeah.
And with that, we have the reality show Extra coming up in just about a minute, where we'll talk about the Olympics. And the main topic would be, should you sanction the Olympics? Many people have been complaining about the opening ceremony, so we'll talk a little bit about that. If, some of the scenes there make it so that if you sanction the Olympics, it might not be appropriate, but also we'll broadly talk about the idea of Olympics. Basically, this sort of like the United Nations for sports. Are you sanctioning nations such as, Russia or China when they are allowed to participate with actual Western democracies, or Western free nations, and even worse when Olympics are hosted in those countries?
Yeah. What an interesting question. You guys can't miss.
So that's for members only. So you can follow the link and become a YouTube member, or if you are an ARCUK website member, you can also join the Zoom call directly. With that, we'll also be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and the reality show, where we will continue this discussion and basically broaden it up a little bit more. Thank you, James, for joining me today, if only with voice. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll see you in just a minute on the reality show Extra. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Be safe.